survived by hiding in the shadows. Vampires, Lycans, and humans. And if this thing.
Selene, blood of a hybrid does not it. No more. Tonight, the darkness into every war, Selene. More graves. You. I join.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
The Underworld franchise has always been built around one simple but powerful idea. Vampires and Lycans have been fighting a secret war for centuries, and humans have been almost completely unaware of what is happening in the shadows. Since the first movie arrived, the series has created its own dark mythology filled with ancient bloodlines, powerful vampire elders, deadly werewolves, forbidden relationships, betrayals, and characters who are willing to sacrifice everything to survive. And at the center of that world has been Selene, the death dealer played by Kate Beckinsale. Now, whenever people hear the words Underworld 6, the first question that comes to mind is obvious. Is Selene really coming back? And what could possibly happen after everything she has already survived? The last major chapter, Underworld, Blood Wars, left the door open for the mythology to continue, but it did not give audiences a simple answer about where the franchise should go next. Selene had already gone from being a loyal vampire warrior to someone who challenged the rules of her own kind. She fought Lycans, vampire elders, traitors, and enemies from within the vampire world itself. More importantly, she became one of the most powerful figures in the entire mythology. That makes a potential sixth movie extremely interesting, because the story can no longer simply repeat the old formula of vampires versus werewolves. After 5 major films, audiences would expect something bigger, darker, and more personal. One of the biggest reasons fans remain interested in another Underworld movie is Kate Beckinsale's Selene. From the beginning, Selene was different from the traditional vampire characters we normally see in Hollywood. She was not sitting in a castle waiting for someone else to save her. She was the hunter. She moved through the darkness with weapons in both hands, hunting Lycans and protecting the vampire world while slowly discovering that the people she trusted were not always telling her the truth. Her journey became one of the most important parts of the franchise, and that is why any discussion about Underworld 6 immediately brings her name back into the conversation. But there is an important difference between what fans want and what has actually been confirmed. There have been plenty of online videos, fan trailers, concept posters, rumored titles, and imaginary cast lists surrounding an Underworld 6 project. Some of these ideas look incredibly convincing, especially when they use modern visual effects and familiar footage of Kate Beckinsale. However, a fan-made trailer should not automatically be treated as an official movie trailer. That distinction matters because viewers can easily see an impressive concept online and assume that Hollywood has already announced the movie. And that brings us to the cast. Kate Beckinsale is obviously the name most fans want to hear, but a 6th movie would also have to decide which other characters should return. Theo James David became an important part of the later movies, and his character represents a completely different side of the vampire world. Instead of simply following the old leadership structure, David became connected to Selene and her struggle against the traditional vampire hierarchy. If another sequel ever moves forward, bringing characters like David back could give the story a strong connection to the previous films without forcing the entire cast of the franchise to return. Then there is Michael Corvin, the hybrid who became one of the most important characters in Selene's story. Michael changed the balance between vampires and Lycans because he was something neither side completely understood. His existence proved that the boundaries between the two species were not as simple as the ancient vampires wanted everyone to believe. His relationship with Selene also gave the franchise an emotional side that went beyond the action. If the story ever revisits Michael, it would create an opportunity to explore what happened to their family and how the next generation fits into this ancient conflict. The mythology itself provides another reason why Underworld 6 could become something much larger than another revenge story. The franchise has already introduced Alexander Corvinus, the original immortal whose bloodline eventually led to both vampires and Lycans. From there, the movies expanded the mythology through characters such as Marcus, William, Victor, Lucian, and the vampire elders. Every revelation made the history more complicated. What originally looked like a simple war between two species eventually became a story about power, slavery, family, betrayal, and the desire to control evolution itself. That history gives a future movie plenty of possibilities. Instead of introducing another random enemy who simply wants to destroy the vampires, the 6th movie could explore a threat connected directly to the origins of the bloodlines. Imagine a character who knows secrets that even Selene has never discovered. Someone who understands why the original immortals were created and why the vampire and Lycan races developed the way they did. That kind of storyline could make the new chapter feel important rather than simply being another battle. The potential plot of Underworld 6 is therefore one of the most interesting parts of the discussion. But it is also where fans should be careful. There are many fictional storylines circulating online, including ideas about new hybrid bloodlines, ancient creatures, secret vampire kingdoms, and the return of supposedly dead characters. These concepts can be fun to imagine, but they should be treated as possibilities rather than confirmed story details. Until an official production gives audiences a real synopsis, nobody should present a fan-created plot as the actual story of the movie. Still, if we imagine the direction a sixth movie could take, there is one obvious place to begin. The world has changed. The old vampire leadership has been shattered. The Lycans have suffered enormous losses, and Selene has already challenged the traditions that controlled her life. The balance of power is completely different from what it was in the original movie. That means the next conflict would probably need to come from a new generation or from something even older than the vampires and Lycans themselves. And this is where the concept becomes really exciting. What if the old war was never actually the real problem? What if vampires and Lycans have spent centuries destroying each other while something else has been waiting for them to become weak? That would completely change the meaning of the previous 5 movies. Selene would suddenly have to face an enemy that cannot be defeated simply by shooting it with silver bullets or using vampire strength. She would have to understand the history she has spent her entire life fighting against. A storyline like that would also give Selene a different role. In the earlier movies, she was primarily a warrior. She hunted, fought, survived, and protected the people she cared about. But after everything she has experienced, she could become something much more significant, a leader. Instead of simply fighting for one side, she could be forced to decide whether the entire war between vampires and Lycans should continue at all. That would create a much more interesting conflict because Selene's greatest enemy might not be a creature standing in front of her. It could be the ancient system that created the war in the first place. The visual style would also be extremely important. Underworld has always had a recognizable identity: dark cities, blue-gray environments, gothic architecture, underground locations, powerful weapons, brutal hand-to-hand combat, and supernatural creatures appearing from the shadows. A sixth movie would need to preserve that atmosphere while giving the franchise something visually new. Modern filmmaking could make the vampire and Lycan battles bigger than ever, but the movie should not lose the dark, mysterious feeling that made the original series stand out. And then we have the trailer question. At the moment, fans should be extremely careful with anything labeled Underworld 6 trailer. The internet is full of concept trailers that combine old footage, newly generated visuals, fan-created scenes, voiceover work, and edited material from completely different movies. Some of them can look so professional that it becomes difficult to tell where official material ends and fan-made material begins. A genuine studio trailer would normally come with clear official promotion, recognizable distribution channels, and confirmed production information. That does not mean the fan trailers are useless. In fact, they show exactly what audiences want from another Underworld movie. They reveal the kind of stories fans are imagining: Selene returning to the darkness, new vampire and Lycan enemies appearing, forgotten bloodlines being discovered, and a war that could become even more dangerous than before. In many ways, these fan concepts are like unofficial previews of the audience's expectations. So when we talk about Underworld 6 in 2026, the most exciting thing is not simply asking whether there will be another movie. The bigger question is what kind of Underworld movie would actually be worth making. After years of vampire versus Lycan battles, another simple war would probably feel familiar. But if the filmmakers were willing to go back to the roots of the mythology, explore the origins of the bloodlines, and give Selene a conflict that challenges her beliefs rather than just her fighting skills, the sixth chapter could potentially feel very different. For now, the safest way to look at Underworld 6 is as a highly anticipated continuation that remains surrounded by fan speculation and unofficial concepts rather than treating every online claim as confirmed information. The franchise has a huge mythology waiting to be explored, and Selene's story still has emotional weight for longtime fans. If the series does return, audiences will not just want more guns, more monsters, and more explosions. They will want a reason to care about this world again, and that is exactly where the real mystery begins. Because after everything Selene has survived, the most dangerous enemy may not be the strongest vampire or the most powerful Lycan. It could be something connected to the very blood that created them all. If that secret is finally uncovered, the next war would not simply decide who controls the underworld. It could decide whether the ancient supernatural world survives at all. If Underworld 6 ever takes the story in that direction, the biggest challenge would be making the new conflict feel personal. The Underworld movies have always worked best when the supernatural action is connected to the characters themselves. Selene was never just fighting Lycans because they were monsters. She was fighting because the war had destroyed her family, changed her life, and eventually forced her to question the people she once trusted. That emotional connection is what made her journey more than a collection of action scenes. A new chapter would need the same kind of emotional foundation. One possibility would be to place Selene in a world where the old rules no longer exist. The vampire elders have lost much of their authority, the Lycan population has been devastated, and the survivors on both sides are trying to understand what comes next. For centuries, their societies were built around the idea that the other species was the enemy. But once that structure collapses, a strange problem appears. What happens when there is no longer a clear enemy to fight? Some vampires might want peace, while others could believe that peace is simply another form of weakness. That internal conflict could become just as dangerous as an outside invasion. Imagine a group of vampires who believe Selene has destroyed the traditions that protected their species for centuries. They might see her as a threat rather than a hero. At the same time, surviving Lycans could blame her for the destruction of their people. Selene would then find herself trapped between two worlds, with neither side completely willing to trust her. That would give the movie a chance to explore a side of her character that the franchise has not always focused on. The burden of being responsible for the future. David could become extremely important in that situation. His connection to the vampire bloodline and his relationship with Selene give him a natural position between the old world and the new one. Instead of simply being another fighter, he could become someone trying to rebuild vampire society. But rebuilding would not be easy. There would be factions that want to return to the old hierarchy, while others would want to create something completely different. The disagreement could eventually split the vampires into rival groups, and when supernatural societies begin fighting among themselves, the consequences can become much worse than a traditional war. The Underworld universe has already shown that vampires can be just as dangerous to one another as they are to Lycans. Betrayal has always been part of this world. Characters have lied about their origins, hidden their real intentions, manipulated their allies, and sacrificed others to gain power. A sixth movie could use that history to create a mystery where the audience does not immediately know who can be trusted. The new antagonist would therefore need to be more than physically powerful. The most memorable villains in this franchise are characters who have a reason for doing what they do. An ancient vampire who wants revenge is not enough. An ancient Lycan who wants to destroy the vampires is not enough either. A stronger idea would be a character who believes the entire supernatural order is a mistake. Someone who thinks vampires and Lycans should never have existed and is willing to erase both bloodlines to restore the world to what it was before the original immortals. That kind of enemy would create a very different fight for Selene. She could not simply defeat this person and walk away. She would have to decide whether the supernatural world deserves to survive. And because she has spent so much of her life killing for survival, that question could force her to look at everything she has done from a completely different perspective. The mythology surrounding the Corvinus bloodline could also become central to the story. Alexander Corvinus was the beginning of a bloodline that eventually produced the two supernatural species. His descendants changed the history of the world without humans even realizing it. A new movie could return to this ancient history and reveal that some parts of the bloodline were never fully understood. Maybe there were branches of the family that disappeared. Maybe someone has been hiding for centuries. Or perhaps another experiment with immortality created a completely different form of supernatural being. The possibilities are wide open, but the story would need to be careful. The Underworld franchise already has a complicated timeline, and adding too many new characters or unexplained bloodlines could make the mythology confusing. The strongest approach would be to connect the new material directly to things audiences already know. That way, longtime fans would recognize the mythology, while new viewers could still understand the central conflict. Another major question is whether the sixth movie would continue directly from Blood Wars or introduce a time jump. A time jump could be especially useful because it would allow the world to change. Instead of immediately starting another battle, the movie could show what happened after the previous war. Perhaps humans have started discovering evidence of supernatural activity. Maybe governments have become aware that vampires and Lycans exist. Or perhaps the supernatural communities have become even better at hiding themselves. The idea of humans discovering the truth could completely change the franchise. For years, the vampires and Lycans have fought in secret. Humans were mostly unaware of the war happening around them. But if that secret suddenly disappears, both sides would have a new problem. They would have to deal with a species that greatly outnumbers them, and humans would not necessarily react peacefully to the discovery of creatures that have been living among them for centuries. That could turn Underworld 6 into something much larger than a supernatural action movie. The conflict could become a three-way struggle between humans, vampires, and Lycans. Some humans might want to destroy the supernatural species, while others could try to use their powers for military or scientific purposes. Vampires and Lycans might be forced to cooperate simply because they have a common enemy. Ironically, that would bring the franchise back to one of its oldest themes: enemies becoming allies. Selene has already experienced how quickly alliances can change. Characters who were once enemies eventually became necessary allies, while trusted companions turned against her. A new alliance between vampires and Lycans would therefore feel like a natural evolution of the story rather than a completely random twist. The action could also become more creative. Instead of repeating the same gun battles and sword fights, the movie could introduce new ways for the supernatural characters to use their abilities. Selene's speed, strength, combat experience, and enhanced senses could be pushed further, but the movie should still make every fight feel dangerous. If the hero becomes unbeatable, the tension disappears. The best action scenes are the ones where the audience believes that even Selene could lose. That is especially important because Selene's greatest strength has always been her determination. She survives because she refuses to stop. Even when she is betrayed, wounded, hunted, or completely outnumbered, she keeps moving forward. A new enemy should therefore challenge her psychologically as well as physically. If someone can make her question the decisions she has made throughout her life, that person could become a much more powerful antagonist than someone who is simply stronger than her. The emotional side could also involve her family. Selene's relationship with Michael and their child gave the later story a personal dimension. The existence of a new generation could become extremely important to the future of the supernatural world. A character connected to Selene's bloodline could potentially represent something neither vampires nor Lycans completely understand. That would make the next generation both a target and a symbol of what the future could become. This is also why returning to the original mythology could make the sixth movie feel fresh. Instead of forgetting everything that happened before, the story could finally bring those pieces together. The ancient bloodline, the vampire elders, the Lycans, the hybrids, Selene, Michael, and the future of both species could all become parts of one larger story. If handled carefully, the sixth chapter could feel like a continuation and a culmination at the same time. But once again, none of these plot ideas should be confused with a confirmed official storyline. They are possibilities based on the world the franchise has already established. The same applies to many cast rumors. Names can appear online long before a movie has actually confirmed anything, and fan-created posters can make an unofficial project look completely real. Until a studio officially announces the production and provides reliable details, fans should treat those claims carefully. The trailer situation is similar. A real trailer would be one of the biggest signs that the project has moved into an official stage. Until then, videos using the name Underworld 6 can be concept trailers, fan edits, AI-generated scenes, or compilations of footage from earlier movies. Some may be entertaining and extremely well made, but that does not make them official promotional material. For fans, though, the continued interest itself says something important. The Underworld universe still has an audience. People still remember Selene, Michael, Lucian, Victor, David, and the ancient conflict between vampires and Lycans. The dark visual style of the franchise remains recognizable, and the idea of returning to that world still creates excitement. That is why rumors about another sequel continue to attract attention even years after the previous movie. If a genuine sixth installment eventually happens, expectations will be high. Fans will want the atmosphere of the original films, the intense action that became a trademark of the series, and a story that actually expands the mythology instead of simply repeating it. Most importantly, they will want a reason for the characters to return. Another movie needs to feel necessary, not just possible. For Selene, the perfect final challenge would not simply be another enemy trying to kill her. It would be a choice. She could finally have the opportunity to end the cycle that has controlled her entire existence, but doing so might require sacrificing the very world she has spent her life protecting. That kind of decision would give the character a meaningful ending while still leaving room for the Underworld universe to continue through new characters, and perhaps that is the most interesting direction the franchise could take. The Underworld does not necessarily have to end with Selene. Her story could become the foundation for a new generation of characters. The vampires could change, the Lycans could change, humans could finally learn the truth, new hybrids could emerge, ancient secrets could be uncovered. The war that began centuries ago could finally evolve into something completely different. So, when people talk about Underworld 6 and everything surrounding the project, it is important to separate confirmed information from fan speculation. The franchise has a huge amount of potential, but the actual future depends on what the filmmakers officially decide to do. For now, the strongest thing we can say is that the world created by Underworld still has plenty of stories left to tell. After 5 movies, Selene has already survived betrayal, war, imprisonment, loss, and enemies who seemed impossible to defeat. But if she returns, her next battle could be different from anything she has faced before. It could be a battle over the future of the entire supernatural world, a battle over the truth behind the ancient bloodlines, and ultimately a battle over whether vampires and Lycans are destined to keep repeating the same war forever. And if the 6th chapter really does bring that story back to the screen, one thing is certain: fans will not just be watching another vampire movie. They will be returning to a world where every shadow can hide an enemy, every alliance can collapse in an instant, and the oldest secrets are often the most dangerous ones. The Underworld may have been quiet for a while, but the darkness of this universe has never truly disappeared. The story can move even deeper into the mythology by asking a question that has been sitting underneath the entire franchise from the beginning. Why were vampires and Lycans allowed to exist in the first place? For centuries, both sides have focused so heavily on destroying each other that very few characters have stopped to question the bigger picture. Selene has spent most of her life reacting to events created by people who lived long before her. If she finally begins searching for the original truth behind the bloodlines, she could discover that the history she was taught was incomplete. That discovery could begin with something small: a forgotten document, an ancient symbol, a hidden chamber, or even an artifact connected to the earliest immortals could point toward a part of history that was deliberately erased. Selene would initially have no reason to believe that the discovery matters, but once she starts connecting the clues, she could realize that several events from the past were not random at all. Certain wars, betrayals, and deaths may have been influenced by someone working from the shadows for centuries. This would give Underworld 6 a mystery element that the earlier movies sometimes used but never completely centered. Instead of immediately telling the audience who the enemy is, the movie could slowly reveal pieces of information. Every answer would create another question. The audience would be forced to look at familiar characters and events differently, wondering whether something important was hidden right in front of them all along. Selene would be the perfect character to investigate this mystery because she has already learned not to trust the official version of history. She was once taught that Lycans were simply monsters and that vampires were the superior species. Over time, she discovered that the truth was far more complicated. She learned about Lycan, the vampire elders, the Corvinus bloodline, and the manipulation that had kept the two species at war. Her greatest transformation was not becoming stronger. It was learning to question the people who claimed to know the truth. That lesson could become the foundation of her next journey. This time, she would not simply be searching for an enemy. She would be searching for answers, and the answers could force her to confront memories she would rather leave behind. One of those memories would inevitably involve Victor. His influence over Selene's life was enormous. He controlled her, manipulated her, and helped shape the person she eventually became. Even after his death, the consequences of his decisions continued to affect her. A new movie could use that history without literally bringing him back. His legacy could remain through hidden records, surviving followers, or people who still believe his methods were justified. That would create an interesting conflict among the vampires. Some could see Selene as the person who broke the old system, while others could consider her responsible for destroying their traditions. They might believe that the vampire society needs someone willing to restore order, even if that means returning to the brutal methods of the past. David could find himself caught in the middle. He understands the old vampire world, but he also understands Selene. His position could make him one of the few characters capable of negotiating between the different factions. However, that role would put a target on his back. If one side believes he is betraying them, his connection to Selene could become a weakness rather than a strength. The Lycans would have their own problems. After years of conflict, they have lost much of their strength. But a weakened enemy can sometimes become more dangerous because desperate survivors have nothing left to lose. Instead of another massive Lycan army, the new story could focus on a smaller group that refuses to accept the new order. Some of these Lycans could blame Selene for everything that happened to their species. They might not care about the ancient history or the possibility of peace. They could want revenge. That would put Selene in a difficult position because she would have to decide whether revenge deserves another response or whether the cycle finally needs to stop. The movie could make this even more complicated by introducing a Lycan leader who does not want war. Someone who believes that vampires and Lycans have been manipulated for centuries and that both species have suffered because of the same ancient system. Such a character could become an unexpected ally for Selene. At first, she would probably distrust him. That would make sense considering everything she has experienced. But slowly, their relationship could change. They might discover that they have more in common than they expected. Both have lost people because of the war. Both have been used by powerful leaders. Both have spent their lives fighting because they were told there was no other choice. That would allow the film to explore one of the franchise's strongest themes, identity. Are these characters truly enemies because of what they are, or because they were taught to hate each other? The answer could become central to the new conflict. Meanwhile, humans could begin getting closer to discovering the supernatural world. Perhaps strange incidents have become too difficult to hide. Bodies disappear. Security footage captures creatures moving at impossible speeds. Unexplained attacks happen in major cities. Governments begin collecting evidence. At first, officials might assume they are dealing with some kind of biological experiment or terrorist threat. But eventually, someone discovers the truth. Once humans realize that vampires and Lycans are real, everything changes. The supernatural world can no longer depend on secrecy. The vampires have centuries of experience hiding themselves, but modern surveillance technology creates a completely different challenge. Cameras are everywhere. Satellites monitor cities. Digital records can spread around the world within seconds. For Selene, this would create a completely new kind of battlefield. She cannot simply destroy every camera or silence every witness. She would need to think strategically. She would need allies. And for perhaps the first time, vampires and Lycans might have to cooperate openly. That could create some great character moments because these creatures have spent centuries believing that cooperation with the other species is impossible. Imagine a vampire warrior being forced to fight alongside a Lycan. At first, neither would trust the other. They would argue over strategy, question each other's motives, and probably expect betrayal at any moment. But during a major battle, one could save the other's life. That single moment could begin changing everything. Instead of creating an alliance through speeches, the movie could build it through actions. One character protects another when there is no reason to do so. Another refuses to take revenge even when they have the opportunity. Slowly, the characters begin realizing that the old rules are not protecting them anymore. This would also give Selene a powerful role as the bridge between the two species. She has spent enough time among both worlds to understand their strengths and weaknesses. She knows how vampires think, but she also understands the Lycans better than she once did. That experience makes her uniquely qualified to lead a new alliance. But leadership would come at a cost. Selene has never been someone who wanted political power. She is most comfortable on the battlefield. Give her a weapon and an enemy, and she knows exactly what to do. Give her a room full of leaders arguing about the future, and things become much more complicated. That could actually make the character more human. She could make mistakes. She could trust the wrong person. She could lose control when someone threatens her family. She could question whether she is really capable of leading an entire world when she has spent so much of her life simply surviving. That internal struggle would make the action more meaningful because every battle would have consequences beyond physical survival. And then comes the moment when the real enemy finally reveals itself. Instead of being another vampire or Lycan, the antagonist could be someone who has been studying both species for centuries, someone who knows exactly how their powers work and understands their weaknesses. Perhaps this character has been manipulating the war from behind the scenes, making sure that neither side ever becomes powerful enough to discover the truth. Their goal would not necessarily be domination. Their goal could be control. They could believe that vampires and Lycans are too dangerous to exist without someone controlling them. In their mind, every war, every betrayal, and every sacrifice was necessary to keep the supernatural world from destroying itself. That would make the villain much more interesting because they would not see themselves as evil. They would genuinely believe that they are saving the world. Selene would disagree, and that disagreement would become the heart of the movie. The villain could offer Selene a choice: return to the old system and restore order, or destroy the system completely and risk exposing the supernatural world to humanity. There would be no easy answer. If she chooses order, she becomes part of the same cycle that created her suffering. If she chooses freedom, she could put every vampire, every Lycan, and even humanity in danger. That kind of decision would give the movie emotional weight beyond the action. The final act could then bring all the different storylines together. The vampire factions would have to choose sides. The surviving Lycans would have to decide whether revenge is more important than survival. Humans would become aware of the supernatural world. David would have to decide where his loyalty truly lies. And Selene would finally have to decide what kind of future she wants. The battle itself could take place somewhere connected to the origins of the Bloodline, an ancient location hidden from both vampires and humans, a place where the earliest secrets of the Underworld were protected for centuries. When Selene arrives there, she could finally discover the truth about the war. And perhaps the most powerful revelation would be that the war was never supposed to continue forever. The original conflict may have begun because of fear, but over centuries, fear became tradition. Tradition became hatred. Hatred became identity. And eventually, nobody remembered why they were fighting anymore. Selene would understand that better than anyone, because her entire life has been shaped by a war she never started. Now, she has the opportunity to end it, but ending the war does not mean everyone will forgive her. Some characters will never accept peace. Some will believe she has betrayed their ancestors. Others will see her as the person who finally gave them a future. That uncertainty would be much more realistic than a perfect ending. And if the filmmakers wanted to leave the door open for another chapter, the ending could introduce a completely new generation. Selene could survive, but her role could change. She would no longer need to be the person who fights every battle herself. Instead, she could become the person who prepares others for the world that comes next. That would allow the Underworld universe to continue without making Selene's story meaningless. It would also give longtime fans something they have rarely received from this franchise: a genuine sense of evolution. The world would no longer be exactly what it was in the first movie. Vampires would have to rethink their traditions. Lycans would have to rethink their hatred. Humans would have to accept that the supernatural world exists. And Selene would finally have to live with the consequences of the choices she made. That is the kind of direction that could make Underworld 6 feel like more than another sequel. It could feel like the beginning of a new era. For now, though, fans should separate imagination from confirmed information. There is a huge difference between what could happen in a future Underworld movie and what has officially been announced. Rumored cast members, fan-made trailers, concept posters, AI-generated scenes, and fictional plot descriptions can create a convincing picture, but they should not be treated as official movie news. The real excitement comes from the fact that the franchise still has enough mythology to support another story. There are ancient bloodlines that could be explored, characters whose stories could continue, and conflicts that could evolve beyond the traditional vampire versus Lycan formula. And if the series ever returns, the biggest challenge will not be creating a bigger monster or a louder action sequence. It will be creating a story that gives the audience a reason to care. Because after everything Selene has been through, the next chapter should not simply ask whether she can survive another night. It should ask whether she can finally create a world where she does not have to keep fighting. And perhaps that is the most fitting question for the future of the Underworld itself. After centuries of bloodshed, can the creatures of the darkness finally choose something other than war? The idea of a new world without the old vampire and Lycan war would sound almost impossible to Selene, because fighting has been part of her identity for so long. She knows how to survive when someone is chasing her. She knows how to enter a dangerous building, identify a threat, and react before anyone else has time to think. But peace is different. Peace requires trust, patience, and the ability to believe that tomorrow can actually be better than today. For someone who has spent centuries surrounded by betrayal and death, that could be harder than any physical battle. That is where a new chapter could really explore Selene as a character. Instead of immediately placing her in another war, the story could give her a short period where she believes the fighting might finally be over. The surviving vampires begin rebuilding. The remaining Lycans retreat into hiding. Humans still do not fully understand what exists around them. For a moment, it looks as though the ancient conflict has finally reached its ending. But Underworld has never been a universe where peace lasts very long. Something begins happening to the survivors. Vampires start disappearing from protected locations. Lycans are found dead in places where they should have been safe. At first, everyone assumes the other side is responsible. Old hatred immediately returns. The vampires prepare for another Lycan attack. While the Lycans believe the vampires have started hunting them again, Selene, however, notices something that does not make sense. The victims are not being killed in the same way. There are no familiar vampire weapons, no silver ammunition, no obvious signs of a traditional Lycan attack. Whoever is responsible is using methods that neither side recognizes. That means the enemy may not belong to either species. This would give the movie a strong mystery that develops alongside the action. Instead of telling the audience everything immediately, the story could allow Selene to investigate each incident. She follows clues through abandoned buildings, underground tunnels, forgotten vampire archives, and locations connected to the earliest history of the Corvinus bloodline. Every discovery brings her closer to something that powerful vampires have spent centuries trying to hide. And eventually, she finds evidence that someone has been watching the supernatural world for a very long time. This person could have records of vampire movements, Lycan transformations, hybrid abilities, and even Selene's own history. The information is far too detailed to have been collected recently. Whoever created these records has been studying them for generations. That revelation would immediately raise another question. Why? What could possibly be valuable enough to make someone spend centuries studying creatures like vampires and Lycans? The answer could be connected to their blood. The supernatural abilities in this universe have always been tied to bloodlines. Blood determines strength, transformation, immortality, and even the ability to create hybrids. That makes blood more than a biological detail. It is the foundation of the entire supernatural world. A new enemy could, therefore, be interested in controlling that foundation. Imagine a group that believes the Corvinus bloodline is the key to creating a completely new form of immortality. They do not want to become vampires. They do not want to become Lycans. They want to create something that combines the strongest qualities of both species without inheriting their weaknesses. That would immediately make Selene and her family targets. Because Selene represents something that the old vampire leaders never fully understood. Her bloodline has already been affected by extraordinary events, and her connection to the hybrid world makes her more valuable than an ordinary vampire. David could also become a target because of his own connection to the ancient bloodline. If the enemy wants to understand the future of the supernatural species, they would need people who represent different branches of that history. This could create a situation where Selene and David have to protect people who once would have been considered enemies, and that would test their leadership. David may believe that diplomacy is the answer. Selene may believe that the enemy needs to be stopped before it becomes too powerful. Their disagreement would not necessarily make them enemies, but it could create tension between them. Selene's instinct has always been to strike first when she senses danger. David might argue that doing so could start another war. For once, Selene would have to decide whether her instincts are helping the world or simply repeating the behavior that created its problems. That internal conflict could become one of the strongest emotional elements in the story. Meanwhile, the enemy would continue moving in the shadows rather than attacking openly. They would manipulate both sides. A vampire is given false information about a Lycan attack. A Lycan receives evidence suggesting that vampires are preparing a massacre. Each side reacts emotionally, and slowly the old hatred begins returning. Selene realizes what is happening, But convincing everyone else is much harder. Some vampires will not believe her because they already blame her for changing their society. Some Lycans will refuse to listen because they have lost too many people. And humans who have recently discovered the supernatural world may decide that neither side deserves their trust. The situation becomes a perfect storm. Everyone is afraid. Everyone expects betrayal. And the hidden enemy benefits from that fear. This would bring the story back to one of the franchise's most important ideas: control through fear. The vampire elders used fear to maintain their authority. The Lycans were controlled by fear of extinction. Selene herself was manipulated because she believed the stories she had been told about her enemies. Now the new villain would be using exactly the same weakness against everyone. The difference is that Selene finally understands the pattern. She knows that the easiest way to control someone is to convince them that they have no choice. So she refuses to accept the choices being offered to her. Instead of allowing the vampires and Lycans to fight again, she tries to expose the manipulation. That means entering territory where she is not welcome and speaking to people who would normally shoot her on sight. Some of these meetings would go badly. Others would reveal unexpected allies. One of the most interesting characters could be a young Lycan who has never experienced the original war personally. Unlike the older generations, this character does not carry the same hatred. They know the history, but they do not feel personally responsible for it. That character could represent the future. They might ask Selene a simple question: if the old war was created by people from centuries ago, why should the next generation continue fighting it? Selene would have no easy answer, because deep down, she knows the question is correct. The same could happen on the vampire side. A younger vampire could question the old traditions and wonder why their people still follow rules created by ancient leaders who are no longer alive. For the first time, the movie could show vampires and Lycans who are not interested in inheriting the hatred of their ancestors. They simply want to survive. That would make the old conflict feel almost tragic, rather than heroic. The final confrontation could then bring everyone together at the location where the enemy is attempting to unlock the secrets of the ancient bloodline. The setting should feel completely different from the modern cities seen throughout the franchise. It could be an ancient underground structure hidden beneath a forgotten settlement, filled with symbols connected to the earliest immortals. Selene arrives knowing that she may not walk away. The enemy finally reveals why they have been manipulating the conflict. Their goal was never simply to kill vampires or Lycans. They wanted to force the two species into desperation, because desperate creatures are easier to study, control, and manipulate. Selene realizes that the war itself was the weapon. Every battle created more blood. Every death created more fear. Every betrayal pushed the supernatural world closer to collapse. And now the enemy is ready to take advantage of the chaos. But Selene has spent too many centuries being controlled. This time, she chooses differently. Instead of fighting alone, she allows vampires and Lycans to fight together. That decision would completely change the final battle. Vampires use their speed and precision. Lycans use their strength and instincts. Humans provide technology and tactical support. David coordinates the different groups, while Selene goes directly after the person responsible. The battle would not be easy. Characters would be wounded. Some would sacrifice themselves. Old enemies would have to trust one another in moments where hesitation could mean death. And eventually, Selene would reach the center of the operation. There would be one final choice. She could destroy the technology or mechanism being used to manipulate the bloodline. But doing so might also destroy valuable knowledge about the supernatural species. If she destroys it, future generations may never know the full truth. If she saves it, someone else could eventually use the same knowledge to create another war. Selene chooses destruction. For the first time, she chooses to protect the future rather than preserve the past. The consequences would be enormous. The hidden records disappear. The ancient secrets are lost. The enemy is defeated, but the supernatural world is changed forever. When the surviving vampires and Lycans emerge, they realize that something fundamental has happened. They are no longer following the same rules, and Selene, standing among them, understands that her greatest victory was not killing the enemy. It was breaking the cycle. The world above remains unaware of most of what happened. Humans continue living their ordinary lives, while somewhere beneath the surface, the supernatural survivors begin creating a new Order. There will still be disagreements. There will still be danger. There will still be vampires who believe the old ways were better. There will still be Lycans who cannot forgive, but the war is no longer inevitable, and that could be the real meaning behind a potential new chapter of the Underworld franchise, not simply another battle between darkness and darkness, but the possibility that the characters finally learn that survival does not always require destruction. For Selene, that would be the ultimate evolution. She began her journey as a warrior who believed that killing her enemies was the only way to protect herself and the people she loved. She eventually discovered that the people she trusted could be just as dangerous as the creatures she hunted. Over time, she learned that truth was more complicate than the stories she had been told. A final chapter could bring all of those lessons together. She does not become weaker by choosing peace. She becomes stronger because she finally has something more difficult to protect than herself. Future. And if Underworld 6 ever follows a direction like this, the biggest attraction would not simply be seeing Selene return with her weapons. It would be seeing what happens when the woman who spent centuries fighting finally gets the chance to decide what comes after the war. That is where the next part of the story could become even more interesting. Because once the old system collapses, somebody has to build something new. And in the Underworld, building something new may be even more dangerous than destroying the old. The moment the old system begins to collapse, the supernatural world enters a completely different period. For centuries, vampires survived because they had structure, rules, elders, and traditions that controlled almost every part of their existence. The Lycans had their own hierarchy, their own leaders, and their own reasons for resisting vampire control. Even when both sides were fighting, they understood the rules of that war. Now those rules are disappearing, and nobody knows what comes next. For Selene, this should have been a victory. The cycle of hatred has finally been challenged, and the ancient forces manipulating both sides have been defeated. But she quickly discovers that ending a war does not automatically create peace. When people have lived with fear for hundreds of years, removing that fear can leave a dangerous emptiness behind. The vampires are the first to feel it. Some of them accept the new reality, but others are furious. They believe Selene has destroyed the traditions that protected their species. They argue that vampires survived for centuries because they followed strict rules, and without those rules, humans will eventually discover them and destroy them. A powerful group begins forming in secret. They call themselves the Keepers, a name connected to their belief that the old vampire traditions must be preserved. They do not necessarily want Selene dead, at least not yet. Instead, they want her to understand that the world cannot simply be rebuilt according to her ideas. Their leader is someone who has remained hidden through most of the previous conflicts. Unlike the old elders, this person does not seek attention. They understand that power is easier to maintain when nobody knows you possess it. At first, Selene assumes the Keepers are simply another faction trying to restore the old order. But she soon realizes their plan is much more complicated. They want to control the future of both vampires and Lycans. The idea is terrifying because it means the final battle may not have solved everything. The previous enemy may have been defeated, but the desire for control still exists. As long as someone believes they have the right to decide the future for everyone else, another conflict can begin. David becomes increasingly concerned about the situation. He has seen enough wars to understand where this is going. If the Keepers gain influence, the vampires could split again. And if the Lycans discover that vampires are secretly organizing, they may assume the worst. Selene knows she has very little time. She begins traveling between different vampire territories, trying to convince the leaders not to return to the old system. But her reputation makes that difficult. To some vampires, she is still the warrior who destroyed their traditions. They do not see her as a liberator. They see her as the reason their world became unstable. That creates one of the most difficult situations Selene has ever faced. She cannot simply shoot her way through it. For once, violence would make everything worse. So she has to learn how to lead without using fear. That change would be important because Selene has always been strongest when she is physically fighting. But a leader cannot solve every problem with a weapon. Sometimes the hardest fight is convincing people not to pick up their weapons in the first place. Meanwhile, the Lycans are facing a similar crisis. Some of them want peace. Others believe peace with vampires is impossible. They remember generations of suffering and refuse to forget it simply because a new alliance has become necessary. A Lycan faction called the Bloodborne begins gathering strength. Their leader believes the vampires will eventually betray them again. According to him, cooperation is only temporary, and the Lycans must prepare for the next war before the vampires become powerful enough to attack them. The Bloodborne begin attacking vampire settlements. But there is something unusual about the attacks. They are too organized. The Lycans are not simply attacking randomly. They are targeting specific locations, specific people, and specific pieces of information. Selene realizes that someone may be manipulating them. Again, she begins investigating and discovers that the Keepers and Bloodborne have connections. They are not openly working together, but someone has been feeding both groups information designed to make them distrust each other. The plan is simple. Create enough fear, and the old war will return by itself. No army needs to be ordered to attack. No leader needs to declare war. All it takes is one misunderstanding at the right moment. Selene becomes determined to expose the truth before the two sides completely turn against each other. This investigation leads her to an unexpected place, the human world, because someone has been helping the supernatural factions from outside. Human technology has been used to track vampire movements. Secure communication systems have been compromised. Locations that should have been invisible have suddenly become exposed. The supernatural world is not the only one changing. Humans are getting closer. A small group of government researchers has discovered evidence of vampire and Lycan activity. They do not fully understand what they have found, but they know that something impossible is happening. And unlike the ancient vampire elders, these humans do not believe in hiding from the problem. They want answers. They want to understand how the supernatural creatures live, how their bodies function, and whether their abilities can be reproduced. That makes them dangerous, not because they are stronger than vampires or Lycans, but because they have technology. Modern surveillance, biological research, drones, advanced weapons, and global communication give humans an advantage the supernatural world has never faced before. For centuries, vampires believed humans were powerless because humans did not know the truth. Now the truth is slowly becoming visible. Selene realizes that if humans learn everything at once, the result could be catastrophic. Some humans might try to destroy the supernatural species, others might try to capture them, and some might want to become them. The third possibility worries Selene the most, because if humans learn how vampire blood works, someone will eventually try to reproduce it. That could create a new generation of creatures with no connection to the ancient rules. Creatures that were not born as vampires or Lycans, but engineered. And that could be the real threat of the next chapter. The Keepers believe they are protecting the vampire world. The Bloodborne believe they are protecting the Lycans. The humans believe they are protecting humanity. But all three groups could accidentally create something far more dangerous. A new species. Something that does not belong to either side. Something that does not care about the old war. This is where the story could introduce a completely new type of antagonist. Not another ancient vampire, not another Lycan leader, but the result of combining modern science with supernatural blood. The creature could be intelligent, extremely fast, physically powerful, and almost impossible to track. More importantly, it could learn. Every encounter would make it stronger. Every battle would teach it something new. Selene could defeat it once, only for it to return with a strategy designed specifically to counter her. For the first time, she would be fighting an enemy that evolves faster than she does. That would make every confrontation unpredictable. David would argue that they need to capture one of these creatures rather than destroy it. If they understand how it was created, they might be able to stop the process. Selene would disagree. She would know from experience that some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. Their disagreement would become another major conflict, but this time, neither character is completely wrong. David wants to understand the threat so they can prevent it. Selene wants to destroy it before anyone else can create another one. The argument becomes even more emotional because Selene has spent her entire life watching powerful people experiment with bloodlines and use living beings as tools. She refuses to let history repeat itself. Eventually, the group discovers the location where the new creatures are being created. It is not an ancient castle. It is not a forgotten vampire fortress. It is a modern underground laboratory hidden beneath a major city. That contrast would give the movie a completely different visual identity. The old world of Underworld collides with the modern world. Ancient vampires walk through futuristic laboratories. Lycans fight heavily armed human soldiers. Selene moves through corridors filled with surveillance systems while trying to avoid being detected. And somewhere inside the facility is the secret that could determine the future of every species. The final confrontation begins when the laboratory's security system activates. The scientists realize their facility has been discovered. The doors lock. The lights shut down. The entire building enters emergency mode. Selene knows what that means. They are not simply trying to escape. They are preparing to destroy the evidence. Explosions begin throughout the facility. David and the others try to rescue the captured supernatural prisoners while Selene moves deeper into the building. And then she sees them. Rows of containment chambers. Some are empty. Some contain failed experiments. And some contain creatures that are still alive. Selene realizes that the threat is much larger than she imagined. This was never one experiment. It was an entire program. And if even one of these creatures escapes, the supernatural world could face an enemy it has never encountered before. Selene reaches the central chamber. Inside is the first successful creation. It looks almost human, but its eyes reveal that it is not. The revelation that the creature was created using Selene's blood changes everything. Until this moment, she believed the new threat was simply another experiment created by humans who wanted to understand the supernatural world. Now she realizes that the scientists have been studying her specifically. Every battle she fought, every transformation she survived, and every change in her bloodline may have been part of the information they needed. The creature stands silently inside the containment chamber, watching Selene with an unsettling calmness. It does not behave like a mindless monster. It understands its surroundings. It understands the people standing outside the glass. Most importantly, it understands Selene. David immediately realizes that killing the creature may not solve the problem. If the laboratory has successfully created one being using Selene's blood, there could be other samples stored somewhere in the facility. Destroying the creature without destroying the research would simply allow the experiment to continue somewhere else. Selene does not want to hear that. She has seen what happens when powerful people become obsessed with bloodlines. The vampire elders did it. The Lycans did it. Humans are now doing the same thing. She knows exactly where that road leads. The creature suddenly attacks. The containment glass explodes outward, and the room turns into chaos. Selene reacts instantly, firing before the creature can reach David. The bullets slow it down, but they do not stop it. It moves with incredible speed. Selene has fought fast enemies before, but this is different. The creature seems to anticipate her movements. It watches the way she positions her body and reacts before she even pulls the trigger. David tries to help, but the creature throws him across the room. Selene realizes that the scientists have created something capable of learning from every attack. She changes her strategy. Instead of fighting directly, she starts using the environment. She destroys lights, activates emergency systems, and forces the creature into narrow corridors where its speed becomes less useful. For a moment, it works. But then the creature adapts again. It begins using the darkness against her. Selene understands that she cannot win through strength alone. She needs to know what the creature wants. When she finally gets close enough to speak to it, the creature tells her something unexpected. It does not want to kill her. It wants to understand her. The scientists created it using her blood, but they did not give it a complete history. It knows pieces of Selene's memories because fragments of biological information were passed through the blood samples, but it does not understand what those memories mean. It knows Victor. It knows Michael. It knows the war. It knows the pain, but it does not understand why Selene continued fighting. That creates a strange relationship between them. The creature sees Selene as the closest thing it has to a parent, while Selene sees it as the result of everything she has spent her life trying to prevent. Neither knows what to do with that connection. David believes the creature can be taught. Selene believes teaching it may create another danger. The argument between them becomes intense because David sees something Selene refuses to admit. The creature is not evil. It was created by people who wanted to control it. That distinction matters. Selene has spent her entire life fighting creatures because of what they were supposed to be. Now she is faced with something that has never had the opportunity to choose what it becomes. If she destroys it, she may simply be repeating the same cycle. So she lowers her weapon. The creature does not attack. For the first time, it realizes that Selene is choosing not to kill it. That moment could become one of the most important scenes in the entire story. Because Selene is not simply saving the creature, She is breaking another part of her own past. She is refusing to decide someone's fate simply because they were created differently. But the humans controlling the laboratory have no intention of allowing that relationship to continue. The facility's security system activates again. A voice announces that containment has failed and the entire complex will be destroyed. David immediately understands the plan. The scientists would rather destroy their own research than allow Selene to escape with it. Selene and David begin freeing the other prisoners. The creature helps them. And this is where the audience sees exactly how dangerous it really is. It moves through the facility faster than anyone can follow, tearing through security doors and disabling armed guards. But unlike earlier, it does not kill everyone in its path. It begins choosing when to attack. It is learning morality at the same time it is learning combat. Selene notices. She realizes that the creature may have inherited more than physical abilities from her blood. It may have inherited something else. The ability to choose. The laboratory begins collapsing around them. They have only minutes to escape. The group reaches the main underground tunnel, but the route is blocked by a massive security door. David tries to open it manually. Nothing happens. Selene looks back. The creature is standing behind them. It understands what needs to happen. It moves toward the door. Selene tells it not to. But the creature refuses. It uses its strength to hold the collapsing structure long enough for everyone else to escape. Selene watches as the tunnel begins falling apart. For a moment, she believes she is about to lose it. But just before the structure collapses completely, the creature disappears into the darkness. Nobody knows whether it survived. Selene refuses to believe it is dead. Outside the facility, the survivors regroup. The human scientists are gone. The laboratory is destroyed. But David discovers something that makes the situation even more complicated. A small data device survived. It contains records of the experiments. Selene wants to destroy it. David stops her. The files may contain information about other laboratories. If the scientists were working on this project for years, there may be other facilities around the world. That means destroying one laboratory may have accomplished nothing. Selene reluctantly agrees to examine the information. The files reveal locations in several countries. There are multiple research centers. Some are active, some are abandoned, and one location is marked differently. It is labeled as the original project. The first laboratory, the place where the research began. Selene realizes that the facility they just destroyed was only one branch of a much larger operation. The real laboratory has never been found, and that means the person responsible is still alive. The story then shifts toward a new mystery. Who started the project? Why did they choose Selene? And how did they obtain her blood? The answer could be connected to an event from years earlier, something Selene thought was insignificant, a battle, a wound, a moment when she was captured. Perhaps during one of those events, someone collected a small sample without her knowledge. That sample could have been enough to begin the entire program. The idea makes Selene furious. She realizes that someone may have been watching her for years. But there is another possibility. Maybe the person who started the project knew Selene personally. Maybe they were connected to someone from her past. That would bring the story back to the old vampire world. David begins investigating the names in the files. One name immediately stands out. It belongs to someone who was believed to have died long ago. A vampire. Someone connected to the old hierarchy. Someone who disappeared before the final battles. Selene recognizes the name, and she knows exactly what it means. The old world may not be as dead as she thought. The discovery forces her to question everything. Perhaps the previous wars were not simply the result of vampire and Lycan hatred. Perhaps someone has been manipulating events for much longer. Someone who understood that Selene would eventually become the perfect subject for their experiments. Because Selene is not an ordinary vampire. Her history is different. Her bloodline is connected to multiple transformations. She survived abilities that should have killed her. She became stronger through experiences that changed other supernatural creatures. That makes her blood uniquely valuable. And now someone has discovered how to use it. Selene decides there is only one thing she can do. Find the original laboratory. Find the person responsible. And destroy the entire operation. But this time, she will not go alone. David agrees to help. The surviving Lycans send a small group. Even some vampires who once distrusted Selene realize that the threat is too dangerous to ignore. For the first time, a genuine alliance begins forming. Not because everyone suddenly trusts each other, But because they understand that the old divisions are exactly what their enemy wants. As the group prepares to leave, Selene receives a final piece of information. The creature survived. It has been following them. Selene turns toward the darkness. The creature slowly steps into view. It is injured, but alive. And now it is no longer simply a weapon created in a laboratory. It has made a choice. It has chosen Selene. But before anyone can say anything, the creature looks toward the horizon. Something has caught its attention. It tells Selene that there are others. Not one, not two, hundreds. Selene realizes that the laboratory did not create a single new species. It created the beginning of an army. And somewhere in the world, that army is waiting. The next chapter of the Underworld story would therefore become much bigger than the war between vampires and Lycans. It would become a race against time. Selene and her new allies would have to find the original laboratory before the experiments are released. Asterisk. The discovery that there may be hundreds of these new creatures changes the entire situation. Until now, Selene believed the laboratory was an isolated operation, but the evidence suggests something much larger has been happening in secret. Someone has been building a new species while the vampires and Lycans were too busy fighting each other to notice. And if even a fraction of these creatures have the abilities of the one Selene encountered, the balance of power could change overnight. The group decides that they cannot wait. Every hour they spend searching for answers gives the hidden organization more time to prepare. Selene knows this kind of enemy. They do not attack when they are weak. They wait until they have everything they need, and then they strike when their victims are least prepared. David studies the surviving information from the destroyed facility. Most of the files are encrypted, but a few records contain fragments of information about the original project. There are references to bloodline compatibility, hybridization, accelerated regeneration, and something called the evolution program. The name immediately catches Selene's attention because it suggests that the scientists were not simply trying to recreate vampires or Lycans, they were trying to improve them. The idea is disturbing. For centuries, vampires believed immortality was the ultimate achievement. Lycans believed their physical strength made them superior. Hybrids represented the possibility of combining different abilities. But these scientists were trying to go further than all of them. They wanted to create a species that could adapt to any environment, survive almost any injury, and evolve beyond the limitations of both bloodlines. And Selene's blood was apparently the key. The group needs someone who understands human research, so they turn to a scientist who survived the destruction of the laboratory. At first, the scientist refuses to cooperate. She is terrified of what will happen if the information falls into the wrong hands. But when Selene tells her that the experiments are still active, she finally agrees to explain what she knows. The scientist reveals that the program was divided into several stages. The early experiments were failures. Some subjects died. Others became unstable. A few survived but could not control their transformations. Then they discovered Selene's genetic material. Everything changed. Her blood gave them a stable foundation. But even that was not enough. They needed another component, something from the Lycan side. That is why the researchers had been collecting Lycan samples for years. They were combining vampire and Lycan characteristics with human biology to create something completely new. Selene realizes that the old war may have accidentally provided the scientists with everything they needed. Every battle between vampires and Lycans created opportunities to collect blood, tissue, and genetic information. The ancient conflict had unknowingly become a laboratory. That realization makes Selene furious. All those deaths, all those wars, all those people who believed they were fighting for their species, perhaps someone else was benefiting from every battle. The scientist then reveals something even more disturbing. The project has already reached its final stage. The creatures are not waiting to be activated. They are already awake. The group realizes that they may have very little time. Their first objective becomes finding the original laboratory. The location is hidden behind several layers of security, but the scientist identifies a geographical pattern in the surviving data. The laboratories were positioned around areas connected to old vampire and Lycan activity. That means the original facility could be somewhere beneath a place that the supernatural world has known for centuries, a forgotten territory, a location both species believed was too dangerous to enter. Selene immediately recognizes the description. It is connected to an ancient vampire settlement. The group travels there in secrecy. The journey itself becomes tense because nobody knows whether they are being watched. Selene notices small signs along the way: abandoned vehicles, missing people, strange markings, and traces of supernatural activity that do not belong to either vampires or Lycans. Someone has already reached the area. When the group arrives at the settlement, they find it completely empty. No vampires, no Lycans, no humans. Just silence. David immediately realizes that something is wrong. This place was supposed to be abandoned, but the buildings show recent signs of activity. Someone has been living here. They enter one of the structures and discover a hidden passage beneath the floor. The passage leads underground. As they move deeper, the temperature drops. The walls are covered with ancient symbols. Some belong to the vampire elders. Others are connected to the earliest Lycans. But there is something else. A third symbol appears repeatedly, the same symbol they saw in the laboratory. Selene realizes that the organization has been connected to the supernatural world for far longer than anyone knew. The passage finally opens into a massive underground chamber, and there they see it. The original laboratory. It is enormous. Unlike the modern facility they destroyed, this place looks like it was built around something ancient. Modern technology has been installed around stone structures that appear to be centuries old. The scientists did not create their research center here by accident. They built it around an existing location, a place that may have been important to the original bloodlines. Selene walks toward the center of the chamber and sees a large circular structure beneath the floor. David examines the symbols. He believes it could be connected to the earliest Corvinus experiments. If that is true, the scientists did not simply discover Selene's blood. They discovered the original source of the supernatural mutation. The research may have been based on something that existed before vampires and Lycans became what they are today. That means the creatures being created could be more than advanced hybrids. They could be returning the bloodline to an earlier form. Something ancient. Something that existed before the species divided. Selene suddenly hears movement. The lights come on. The entire facility activates. A voice comes through the speakers. It welcomes her. Selene immediately recognizes the voice. It belongs to the person whose name appeared in the recovered files, the person everyone believed was dead. The voice explains that Selene has finally reached the place where everything began. Selene demands to know why. The answer is simple: because she was the missing piece. The person behind the project explains that they had studied the bloodlines for centuries. They watched vampires become dependent on tradition and watched Lycans become trapped by their own rage. They believed both species had reached their limits. Then Selene appeared. She was different. She survived transformations that should have destroyed her. She adapted. She became stronger. She connected different bloodlines, and she repeatedly survived situations that should have killed her. To the person behind the project, Selene was proof that evolution had not ended. It was still happening. Selene refuses to accept that she was created for this purpose. The villain tells her that she was not created. She was discovered. That statement makes Selene pause. Because if it is true, then her abilities were not the result of an experiment. They were already inside her. The laboratory simply learned how to reproduce them. The villain then reveals the final part of the plan. The new creatures are not being created to replace vampires and Lycans. They are being created to inherit the world after them. The vampires and Lycans are considered obsolete. Humans are considered temporary. The new species is supposed to become the dominant life form. David asks why the creatures would obey the scientists. The villain smiles. They will not. That is the point. The creatures are being designed to survive without control. They will be released into the world and allowed to develop independently. The scientist who helped Selene realizes what this means. Once the creatures begin reproducing, there will be no way to stop them. Selene looks around the laboratory. For the first time, she understands the true scale of the threat. This is not about preventing another war. This is about preventing the birth of an entirely new world. Then the alarms begin. Doors open throughout the facility. Hundreds of containment chambers activate. The creatures begin waking. Selene prepares her weapons. David and the others take positions around her. But the creature that was created from Selene's blood steps forward. It does not attack. Instead, it looks at the awakening army. Then it turns toward Selene. It tells her something she never expected to hear. It knows how to stop them, because unlike the others, it was created from Selene's blood without the final control mechanism. It can think independently. It can make choices, and it may be the only one capable of reaching the others. Selene realizes that the creature she once considered a monster may be their only hope. She lowers her weapon. And together, they walk toward the army. The future of the underworld is about to be decided by a creature that was never supposed to have a choice. But now it does. And that choice could determine whether the ancient world survives or disappears forever. The doors continue opening one after another, revealing rows of creatures that have been kept hidden from the world. Some look almost human, while others are visibly more monstrous. But the most disturbing part is that none of them seem confused. They wake with purpose, as if they have been waiting for this moment. Selene watches them carefully. She knows that one wrong move could turn the entire facility into a battlefield. David signals the others to stay back, but the creature created from Selene's blood walks forward without hesitation. It does not show fear. It simply looks at the others as though it can understand something they cannot. The scientist explains that the creatures were programmed to recognize certain biological signals. They were designed to respond to specific bloodline markers, which means the first successful subject may have a unique ability to communicate with them. Selene realizes that this is why the creature said it could stop them. It may not be stronger than the entire army, but it could influence them. The problem is that nobody knows whether it will actually work. The first creature steps out of its chamber. It looks at Selene, then it looks at the hybrid standing beside her. For a few seconds, nothing happens. Then another chamber opens, then another. Soon, dozens of creatures are standing in the corridor. David raises his weapon. Selene tells him to wait. The new creature takes another step forward. Instead of attacking, it raises its hand. The others stop. That single moment confirms what the scientist feared and what Selene hoped might be true. The creatures can be controlled, but not in the way the scientists intended. The original experiment has created something that can influence the others without using the control system. The villain immediately realizes what is happening. For the first time, the calm voice coming through the speakers disappears. The person behind the project orders the security system to eliminate the rogue subject. Automated weapons activate throughout the facility. Selene moves instantly. She fires at the cameras and security systems while David leads the others toward cover. The creature continues standing in the center of the corridor, surrounded by hundreds of potential enemies. Then something unexpected happens. The other creatures begin moving toward it. Not to attack. To follow. The villain watches from the control room as the entire army starts ignoring its commands. The experiment has failed, but the failure has created something far more dangerous for the person who built it. A species capable of choosing its own leader. The villain orders every containment chamber to open. The scientist is horrified. If all of them are released at once, there will be no way to control the situation. But the villain no longer cares. If the experiment cannot be controlled, then the facility itself will become the battlefield. The doors explode open. Creatures rush into the corridors. Vampires and Lycans fight side by side for the first time against a common enemy. The action becomes chaotic. David leads a group of vampires through one section of the facility while the Lycans protect the scientists. Selene moves through the center, searching for the control room. The creatures are fast. They are stronger than normal vampires. They can survive injuries that would kill a Lycan, but they are not invincible. That becomes important. Selene notices that they still have weaknesses. They can heal, but the healing takes time. They can adapt, but adaptation requires exposure. If they encounter something completely unfamiliar, they become vulnerable. That gives the vampires and Lycans a chance. The old enemies begin using their abilities together. Vampires attack from above while Lycans strike from the ground. The combination is far more effective than either side expected. David watches the battlefield and realizes something. They were never weak because they were different. They were weak because they refused to cooperate. That realization changes his approach. Instead of ordering his group to protect only the vampires, he begins coordinating everyone. The Lycans follow his instructions. The vampires follow the Lycans. For the first time, the ancient enemies are fighting as one force. Meanwhile, Selene reaches the control room. She finally sees the person responsible. It is a vampire. Old. Very old. Older than most of the leaders Selene has ever known. The vampire explains that he has been watching the bloodlines for centuries. He remembers the earliest conflicts. He remembers the rise of the vampire elders. He remembers the first Lycans. And he remembers the moment when humans began to interfere. His goal was never revenge. He believed he was protecting the future. He claims that vampires and Lycans are doomed because they cannot adapt quickly enough to a changing world. Humans are becoming too advanced. Technology is spreading. The supernatural world is losing its ability to hide. Eventually, humanity would discover them. The new species was supposed to solve that problem. It could survive anywhere. It could live among humans. It would not need the old supernatural societies. It would replace them. Selene asks him why he believes he should decide who deserves to survive. He tells her that someone has to. That answer makes Selene understand the real problem. This is the same philosophy that created every major conflict in the franchise. Someone always believes they know what is best for everyone else. The vampire believes he can control evolution. The elders believe they could control vampires. The Lycan leaders believe they could control their people. Humans now believe they can control supernatural blood. The cycle never changes. Only the people holding the power change. Selene refuses to continue it. She attacks. The vampire is incredibly fast. The fight moves through the control room and into the surrounding corridors. Selene fires. He dodges. She changes direction. He predicts her movement. For a moment, it looks like she may lose. But Selene has learned something during her years of fighting. Predictability is weakness. She deliberately creates an opening. The vampire takes it. Selene uses the opportunity to trap him. David arrives just in time to help. But the villain is not finished. He reveals that the entire facility is connected to an emergency system. If the control room is destroyed, the laboratory will begin a self-destruct sequence. Selene realizes that the villain has designed the situation so that there is no easy victory. If they kill him and destroy the laboratory, hundreds of creatures could escape. If they leave the laboratory intact, the research could be used again. They need another option. The scientists suggest shutting down the central genetic system instead. If they destroy the system that allows the creatures to reproduce, they can stop the program without destroying the entire facility. But the system is located at the deepest level, and the facility is already collapsing. Selene and the creature head downward. David stays behind to hold the others back. The deeper Selene goes, the older the structure becomes. Modern technology slowly disappears. Stone walls replace steel. Ancient symbols appear again. Selene realizes that the laboratory was built around something far older than the experiment. Something that may have existed before the vampire and Lycan bloodlines became separate. At the bottom, they discover a massive chamber. In the center is a strange biological structure connected to the entire facility. The scientist explains that this is the original source used to stabilize the experiments. It is not artificial. It is ancient. The researchers found it beneath the ground and used it to create the new species. Selene looks at it and realizes that the scientists did not create evolution. They simply found a way to accelerate it. The creature approaches the structure. It begins reacting to it. Selene becomes worried. The creature tells her that it can hear something. A voice. Not from the laboratory. From the blood itself. The ancient structure is communicating with it. The scientist cannot explain what is happening. Then the creature begins changing. Its eyes turn darker. Its body starts reacting violently. Selene tries to reach it, but the creature pushes her away. It tells her to leave. She refuses. The creature says it finally understands what it was created for. Not to become the ruler of a new species. Not to destroy vampires or Lycans, but to decide whether the new species should exist at all. Selene realizes what it intends to do. It is going to destroy the source. But if it does, it may die with it. She tells the creature there must be another way. The creature looks at her. For the first time, it calls her by name, not creator, not origin. Selene. And it tells her that she gave it something the scientists never could. A choice. The creature turns toward the ancient structure. The entire chamber begins shaking. Above them, the battle continues. Vampires and Lycans are trying to evacuate the facility. The villain escapes. The scientists run for safety. David refuses to leave until Selene returns. Then the structure begins collapsing. Selene realizes she has only seconds. She grabs the creature's arm, but it pulls away. It tells her to trust it. And then it steps into the center of the ancient chamber. A powerful wave moves through the facility. Every creature suddenly stops. The entire army becomes silent. Selene looks around. For one moment, the underworld is completely still. Then the creature makes its choice. And the consequences of that choice are about to change the supernatural world forever. The moment the creature makes its choice, everything around Selene seems to freeze. The sounds of fighting disappear. The vampires stop moving. The Lycans stop attacking. Even the creatures that were moments away from tearing through the facility suddenly become completely still. For the first time in centuries, the supernatural world is silent. Selene watches the creature standing at the center of the ancient chamber. The strange biological structure beneath it begins breaking apart, but instead of collapsing immediately, it releases a powerful energy that travels through the underground complex. The scientist realizes what is happening. The creature is not destroying the new species. It is disconnecting them from the system that controls their biology. The experiments were designed to depend on the ancient source. Every creature was connected to it in some way. If that connection is broken, the creatures will no longer be able to reproduce through the process the scientists created. But there is a second consequence. The creatures will also lose the artificial enhancements that made them so powerful. The scientist warns Selene that the process could kill the original subject. Selene refuses to leave. She moves closer. The creature is clearly struggling. Its body is changing rapidly as the connection begins to disappear. It could have escaped. It could have taken control of the entire army. Instead, it chose to end the system that gave it power. That decision tells Selene everything she needs to know. The creature was never the monster. The people who created it were. Selene reaches out and tells it that it does not have to die alone. The creature looks at her and asks why she came back. Selene gives the simplest answer possible. Because she knows what it feels like to believe nobody is coming for you. That moment connects their stories in a way neither expected. Selene remembers being used by people more powerful than herself. She remembers believing that her life belonged to someone else. The creature is experiencing the same thing, except it has only existed for a short time. The difference is that Selene eventually found the strength to choose her own path. Now she wants the creature to have that same opportunity. But the chamber is collapsing too quickly. David arrives and tells Selene they need to leave. She refuses. David understands. He stays. Together, they try to pull the creature away from the ancient structure. The creature tells them it is too late. The connection has already reached the final stage. If they stop now, the system could reactivate. Selene realizes that there is no way to save everyone. Someone has to make the final decision. The creature chooses. The structure collapses. A shockwave moves through the facility. Every remaining containment chamber opens. But instead of attacking, the creatures simply stand there. They are free. For the first time, they are no longer connected to the system. They are individuals. Some look confused. Some are afraid. Some simply walk away. The army that was supposed to replace vampires and lycans has become a group of beings with no leader and no purpose. That is exactly what the original experiment was never designed to allow. Selene and David escape the chamber moments before it collapses completely. The entire underground complex begins falling apart. They make their way toward the surface while the remaining vampires, lycans, and scientists follow behind. When they finally emerge, the facility collapses into the ground. For several seconds, nobody says anything. Everyone is waiting for another attack. Nothing happens. The new creatures do not attack. They simply disappear into the surrounding darkness. Some move into forests. Others vanish into abandoned buildings. A few remain close to the group, uncertain about what to do next. The supernatural world has just gained a new species, and nobody knows what that means. David asks Selene if she believes they are dangerous. Selene looks toward the darkness. She tells him that anything with freedom can become dangerous. But freedom also means something else. Choice. And for the first time, these creatures have it. The surviving vampires begin arguing almost immediately. Some want to hunt the creatures before they become a threat. Others believe they should be left alone. The Lycans are divided as well. Some see the new species as potential allies. Others believe they are an even greater threat than vampires. Selene refuses to allow another war to begin. She tells everyone that the creatures were created by humans, not by vampires or Lycans. They did not choose to become what they are. The vampires argue that the same thing could have been said about many of their enemies. Selene responds that this is exactly why the cycle must end. If they start hunting the new species simply because they are different, they will be repeating the same mistakes again. That argument does not convince everyone. A small group of vampires secretly begins tracking the creatures. The bloodborne Lycans do the same. Selene discovers this and realizes that the danger is not over. The old war may have ended, but a new conflict could begin at any moment. She decides to find the creatures before the others do. David agrees to help. Together, they follow the trail of the first group that disappeared into the forest. They find them near an abandoned industrial area. The creatures are not attacking anyone. They are learning. They watch humans from a distance. They observe animals. They examine machines. They are trying to understand the world. Selene realizes that they are like children. Extremely powerful children who were born with the instincts of predators. That makes them dangerous, but it also means they can still be taught. The creature created from Selene's blood is missing. The group searches the area. Eventually, Selene finds a message carved into a wall. It is a symbol she recognizes. The creature has left it deliberately. The message leads her to another location. An old building outside the city. Selene enters alone. Inside, she finds the creature sitting quietly. It looks different. The change is caused by the ancient structure have stabilized its body. It is no longer connected to the laboratory. It is no longer connected to the artificial system. It is completely independent. Selene asks where it has been. The creature says it was searching. For what? For itself. It has memories from Selene. It has information from the scientists. It has instincts from the bloodlines. But it does not know who it is. Selene understands. That question is something she has struggled with throughout her own life. Was she a vampire? A death dealer? A mother? A warrior? A survivor? Or something completely different? She tells the creature that identity is not something someone else gives you. It is something you choose. The creature asks what name it should have. Selene pauses. She does not choose the name. She tells it that it should choose one for itself. That small decision becomes a major turning point. The creature chooses a name. A simple name. One that does not belong to vampires, Lycans, or humans. It belongs only to itself. From that point forward, the creature is no longer a laboratory experiment. It is an individual. Selene tells it that the others will need guidance. The creature understands. It knows the other new beings are searching for answers too. Some will become peaceful. Some may become dangerous. Some may choose to live among humans. Others may prefer the darkness. But none of them will be controlled again. Selene agrees to help them find their own place. David is skeptical. He worries that Selene is creating another supernatural society. Selene tells him that she is not creating anything. She is simply refusing to destroy something because she is afraid of it. That becomes the central philosophy of the New World. The supernatural communities begin changing. Vampires slowly abandon some of the old traditions. Lycans begin forming independent groups instead of following a single hierarchy. Humans remain unaware of most of what is happening, although rumors continue spreading. Some people report seeing strange creatures. Others claim that vampires are real. Most are dismissed as conspiracy theories, but the secret is becoming harder to maintain. Selene knows that eventually humans will discover the truth. She no longer believes that hiding forever is possible. Instead, she begins preparing for that day. The first step is creating rules between the supernatural groups. No hunting humans. No forced transformations. No experiments on living beings. No secret wars. No manipulation of bloodlines. The rules are simple, but keeping them will be difficult. Not everyone agrees. Some vampires believe humans are too dangerous to trust. Some Lycans believe the rules are impossible to enforce. And the new species has no understanding of the old traditions at all. Selene knows the future will be messy. But at least it will be different. For the first time, the underworld is not being controlled by ancient elders or hidden scientists. It is being shaped by the survivors themselves. Yet there is still one unanswered question. The original laboratory may be destroyed, but the recovered files mention other locations. Some were abandoned, some were marked as inactive, but one was listed as unknown. Selene returns to the remaining data. She studies the coordinates. They point to a place far from the original laboratory, a location that does not appear on any vampire or Lycan map. David asks what she thinks is there. Selene says she does not know. Then she notices something hidden inside the files, a final message from the scientist who created the project. It was recorded before the laboratory was destroyed. The message contains only one sentence. The experiment was not the beginning. It was the second attempt. Selene stares at the screen. David asks what the first attempt was. Asterisk. The discovery that the first generation may still be alive changes Selene's understanding of everything. She had believed that the laboratory destroyed the final stage of the experiment, but the evidence suggests that the scientists were not creating something completely new. They were trying to recreate something that had already existed before. That means the creatures Selene encountered may not be the beginning of the story. They may be the continuation. David studies the remaining files again, searching for anything that could reveal where the original subjects were taken. Most of the information is damaged, but one phrase keeps appearing in different documents: the first blood. Selene immediately understands that this is not simply the name of an experiment. It refers to a bloodline that existed before the modern vampire and Lycan species. The scientist who survived the laboratory confirms what Selene suspected. The original researchers believed that the Corvinus bloodline was not the first supernatural mutation. It was only one branch of something much older. According to their research, an ancient population existed long before the vampires and Lycans developed into separate species. These beings were capable of adapting to different environments and surviving for extremely long periods of time. They were not exactly vampires, and they were not Lycans. They were something else. The early researchers believed that the Corvinus mutation was a later evolution of this ancient bloodline. That means Alexander Corvinus may not have been the beginning. He may have been a descendant. The information is almost impossible to believe. For centuries, supernatural history has been built around the idea that everything started with Corvinus. If that assumption is wrong, then the entire mythology changes. Selene realizes that the only way to know the truth is to find the first generation. But there is a problem. Nobody knows where they are. The files contain several possible locations, but most of them are incomplete. One location appears repeatedly, though: a remote region surrounded by mountains. The researchers refer to it as the sanctuary. According to the records, the first subjects were taken there because the environment was ideal for long-term observation. But no researcher has entered the sanctuary for decades. The reason is simple: the last team that went there never returned. Selene decides they have to go. David immediately objects. They have barely survived the previous laboratory, and now they are considering entering a place where an entire research team disappeared. Selene tells him that this is exactly why they need to investigate. If the first generation is still alive, someone else will eventually find them. And if that someone is another scientist or vampire faction, the cycle will begin again. David knows she is right, so they prepare a small team. This time, they do not take a large army. Selene does not want a war. She wants answers. The group includes David, a small number of vampires, two Lycans who understand the ancient bloodlines, the surviving scientist, and the new creature created from Selene's blood. The creature has chosen its own name, but it keeps much of its identity private. It does not fully understand what it is becoming. That makes it unpredictable. But Selene trusts it. The journey to the sanctuary takes them through an isolated region where almost no humans live. The landscape becomes colder and more dangerous as they move deeper into the mountains. They eventually find signs of an old settlement. The buildings are abandoned. The roads have disappeared. There are no signs of modern civilization, but the scientist notices something strange. The settlement appears to have been abandoned recently. Not decades ago. Recently. They find fresh footprints. Not human. Not Lycan. Not vampire. The group becomes alert. Selene moves ahead alone. She finds a stone wall covered with symbols. One of them matches the symbol from the underground laboratory. Another matches the symbol from the ancient chamber. But the third symbol is completely unfamiliar. The creature looks at it and says it recognizes it. Selene asks how. It says the symbol appears in its memories, not memories from the laboratory. Something older, something it cannot explain. That worries Selene. If the creature remembers the symbol that existed before it was created, perhaps the biological connection between the first generation and the new species is deeper than anyone realized. The group enters the settlement. Suddenly, all communication equipment stops working. The scientist's devices shut down. David's weapons malfunction. Even the creature becomes confused. Something is interfering with their technology. Selene looks around. She realizes they are being watched. A figure appears on a distant rooftop. Then another. Then another. They are surrounded. The figures do not attack. They simply observe. Selene raises her weapon. One of the figures steps forward. It looks almost human, but its eyes are different. Older. Colder. It tells Selene that they have been waiting for her. David asks who they are. The figure does not answer. Instead, it looks directly at the creature. Then it says something that makes everyone silent. You carry the blood of the first. The creature does not understand. Selene asks what the first means. The figure explains that the ancient bloodline existed before the vampire and Lycan division. The first were not created. They evolved. They lived hidden from humanity because they understood that humans would eventually fear them. Some of them became predators. Others chose isolation. And some believed that their blood should be shared. Those who shared their blood created new branches. Eventually, one of those branches became the Corvinus line. Selene realizes what this means. Her own bloodline is connected to something far older than she ever imagined. The figure tells her that the first generation has been watching the vampires and Lycans for centuries. They watched the wars. They watched the elders. They watched Selene. They watched the experiments. They never intervened because they believed the younger bloodlines needed to find their own path. But the creation of the new species changed that. The humans crossed a line that had never been crossed before. They attempted to recreate the first. And now the balance has been disturbed. Selene asks why they did nothing while the experiments were happening. The answer is uncomfortable, because they wanted to see what would happen. They were observing, just like the scientists. That makes Selene furious. She tells them that watching people suffer does not make them innocent. The ancient being agrees. It says that is why Selene was allowed to find them. They wanted to know whether she would react differently, whether she would choose control or freedom. Selene realizes that this entire journey may have been a test. The creature beside her suddenly becomes uneasy. It says it can hear something underground. The ancient beings become silent. One of them tells Selene that the creature was never supposed to exist. It was created from stolen blood, but the experiment accidentally produced something that the first themselves could not create, a being capable of carrying multiple bloodlines without being controlled by any of them. Selene asks whether that makes it dangerous. The answer is yes, but not necessarily in the way she expects. The creature may be the only being capable of connecting the different supernatural bloodlines. Vampire, Lycan, human, and first. That makes it incredibly valuable. It also makes it the most dangerous target in the world. Before Selene can ask another question, the ground begins shaking. The ancient beings immediately become alert. Something has awakened beneath the sanctuary. The scientist recognizes the sound. It is coming from a massive underground chamber. The first leader tells Selene that the sanctuary was not built to protect them. It was built to contain something even older than the first, something that should never have been disturbed. Selene asks what it is. The leader tells her that they call it the hunger. It is not a vampire. It is not a Lycan. It is not human. It is a biological force that feeds on supernatural blood. For centuries, the first kept it contained, but the experiments conducted by humans weakened the barrier. The hunger is waking. And now it is searching for the strongest bloodline. The creature realizes what that means. It is searching for Selene. The ancient beings tell them to leave immediately, but Selene refuses. She knows that running will only delay the problem. If this creature is really feeding on supernatural blood, it could eventually hunt every vampire, every Lycan, and every new species created by the laboratories. The only way to stop it is to understand what it is. Selene enters the underground chamber. David follows. The creature follows as well. The rest of the group waits behind. The deeper they go, the older the structure becomes. There are no modern machines here. No weapons. No laboratories. Only stone and symbols carved into the walls. At the center of the chamber is a massive sealed door. Something is moving behind it. Selene places her hand against the surface. The door reacts. Her blood is recognized. David realizes that the door was built for someone with her bloodline. Selene steps back. The creature tells her that it can hear the thing behind the door. It is calling her, not because it wants to kill her, because it recognizes her. Selene looks at the creature. Then at the ancient door. For the first time, she wonders whether her entire journey has been leading toward this moment. The Vampire and Lycan War, the Corvinus bloodline, the experiments, the new species. The first, all of it may be connected. The door begins opening. A cold wind moves through the chamber. Something ancient wakes on the other side. The ancient door slowly opens, and for several seconds, nobody moves. Selene stands in front of the entrance, staring into a darkness that feels completely different from anything she has experienced before. She has fought vampires, Lycans, hybrids, soldiers, and creatures created in laboratories, but this is something older. There is no sound coming from the other side, yet everyone can feel that something is there. David raises his weapon and tells Selene to step back. She does not. Instead, she moves closer. The creature created from Selene's blood suddenly reacts. Its breathing changes. and it places one hand against the wall, as if trying to understand something that exists beyond normal senses. It says that the thing behind the door is not sleeping anymore. It is awake. The ancient beings outside the chamber immediately begin preparing for a retreat. They know something Selene does not. The door was never supposed to open completely. For centuries, they believed the seal was permanent. But Selene's blood has changed that. The scientist looks at the ancient symbols surrounding the doorway and realizes that the seal was designed to recognize specific bloodlines. The Corvinus bloodline was not simply connected to the first. It was apparently part of the mechanism used to maintain the seal. That means Selene may have unknowingly carried the key her entire life. She asks the ancient leader why nobody told her. The answer is simple: because they were afraid of what she might do with the truth. Selene is furious. She has spent her entire existence being manipulated by people who believed they knew what was best for her. First the vampire elders, then the Lycans, then the scientists. Now the ancient beings are admitting that they also kept secrets from her. She tells them that if they truly want her help, they need to stop treating her like a weapon. The ancient leader accepts her condition. For the first time, the truth begins to come out. The hunger was not created. It was discovered. Long before vampires or Lycans existed, the first found a biological organism deep beneath the earth. It was unlike any creature they had ever encountered. It could consume supernatural blood and absorb certain characteristics from whatever it fed on. At first, the first believed it could be controlled. They were wrong. The more blood it consumed, the stronger it became. Eventually, it began hunting them. The first fought back and discovered that the creature could be weakened by separating it from the bloodlines it consumed. They created the seal, but they could not destroy it. The hunger was too deeply connected to the natural world. So they buried it, and they built the sanctuary above it. For thousands of years, it remained contained, until humans began experimenting with supernatural blood. The new experiments created a signal, a biological signal strong enough to wake the creature. The scientist realizes that the laboratory did not accidentally disturb the hunger. The experiments were attracting it. Every new creature made the problem worse. Every successful hybrid gave it another reason to wake. Selene understands the danger. If the hunger escapes, it will not simply attack one species. It will hunt all of them. The ancient leader tells her that there may be only one way to stop it. The seal needs to be restored. But restoring the seal requires a bloodline connected to the original mechanism. Selene immediately knows what that means: her blood. The creature beside her realizes the same thing. It tells Selene that if she restores the seal, she may have to sacrifice herself. Selene refuses to accept that conclusion. There has to be another way. She asks the scientist to examine the ancient symbols. Together, they discover something unexpected. The original seal was designed when the first believed supernatural blood was one connected system. But over thousands of years, the bloodlines changed. Vampires became vampires. Lycans became Lycans. Humans remained human. The first changed as well. The seal may no longer require a single bloodline. It may require all of them. That creates a completely different possibility. Instead of using Selene's blood alone, they could combine the different bloodlines and create a new seal. But there is a problem. The vampires and Lycans would have to cooperate completely, and the new species would have to participate as well. The very creatures everyone has been afraid of may be the key to saving them. Selene returns to the surface and explains the situation. The reaction is immediate. Some vampires refuse. They do not trust the Lycans. Some Lycans refuse. They believe vampires will betray them. The new creatures remain silent. They do not understand the ancient war, but they understand what is at stake. The creature created from Selene's blood tells them that if the hunger escapes, there will be no future for anyone. That finally changes the conversation. The groups agree to work together, but they have almost no time. The door beneath the sanctuary is opening wider. The hunger begins feeding on the ancient seal itself. The stone around the chamber starts cracking. The ancient beings begin evacuating. Selene refuses to leave. She knows the only chance they have is to rebuild the seal before the creature escapes. David begins organizing the vampires. The Lycan leader gathers his people. The new species spreads through the underground complex, searching for places where the ancient energy is weakening. For the first time, everyone has a role. There is no single army. No single leader. The entire supernatural world has to work together. Selene returns to the chamber. The hunger finally appears. At first, it does not look like a traditional monster. There is no recognizable face. Its body constantly changes. It absorbs the biological traits of everything around it. When it moves past an ancient vampire, its form briefly becomes stronger. When it encounters a Lycan, its muscles change. When it reaches one of the new creatures, its body adapts again. It is learning from everything it touches. Selene understands that direct combat will only make it stronger. She tells everyone not to attack unless absolutely necessary. But one of the vampires panics. He fires. The shot hits the hunger. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the creature changes. The bullet's material becomes part of its body. Everyone realizes what they are dealing with. Every attack gives it more information. Every injury teaches it how to survive. Selene orders everyone to stop. The only way to defeat it is to contain it. That means they need to rebuild the seal while avoiding direct contact. The process begins. The vampires take one side. The Lycans take another. The new species takes the remaining positions. Each group has to maintain a specific connection to the ancient structure. If one side breaks formation, the entire system will fail. The hunger senses what is happening. It begins moving toward them. Selene stands directly between it and the seal. She knows it will come for her because of her blood. The creature created from her blood steps beside her. Selene tells it to stay back. It refuses. For the first time, Selene realizes that she cannot protect everyone by herself. She has spent centuries believing that being strong means carrying everything alone. Now she understands that real strength can mean trusting someone else. The hunger attacks. Selene moves. She avoids direct contact and uses the environment to redirect it. The creature beside her does the same. Together, they keep it away from the others. David and the Lycan leader complete their parts of the seal. The ancient structure begins glowing. The hunger becomes more aggressive. It reaches Selene. For one moment, its body touches her arm. Selene feels an intense pull. The creature is trying to absorb her blood. She nearly collapses. The creature created from her blood attacks immediately. It forces the hunger away, but the hunger absorbs part of its energy. The new creature becomes weaker. Selene catches it before it falls. It tells her that the seal is almost ready. She asks how it knows. It says that it can feel the ancient system changing. The final connection is missing. Selene looks at the center of the chamber. There is only one position left, the position connected directly to her bloodline. She realizes what must happen. She steps toward it. David tells her not to. Selene says that this time she has a choice. Nobody is ordering her. Nobody is controlling her. She is choosing to protect the future. She places her hand against the ancient structure. The seal activates. A powerful wave moves through the chamber. The hunger begins losing its connection to the outside world. But it fights back. It reaches towards Selene one final time. The creature created from her blood steps between them. The hunger absorbs the energy from its body. Selene screams for it to move. It refuses. It tells her that this is the choice it made, the same choice she once gave it. The ancient structure begins closing. The hunger is pulled backward. The chamber shakes violently. The seal closes. Everything becomes silent. Selene drops to the ground. David rushes toward her. She is alive, but the creature is gone. There is no sign of it. The ancient beings stand in silence. The seal has been restored. The hunger is contained again, but nobody knows what happened to the creature. Selene refuses to believe it is dead. She searches the chamber. Nothing. Then she notices something on the ground. A small mark, the same symbol the creature used before. It is glowing faintly. Selene touches it. A single image appears in her mind. The creature is alive, but it is somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the sanctuary. And it is not alone. Selene looks toward the darkness. The ancient leader tells her that the creature may have been pulled into another part of the underground network, a place even the first have never explored. Selene asks if they should follow. The leader warns her that opening another path could weaken the seal. Selene looks at the symbol again. The shaking beneath the sanctuary becomes stronger, and for the first time even the ancient beings appear genuinely afraid. The vampires and Lycans instinctively move into defensive positions, but Selene does not look toward the sealed chamber. Instead, she looks at the ground beneath her feet. The movement is coming from somewhere much deeper, far below the chamber where the hunger was imprisoned. Whatever is moving down there is not trying to break the seal. It is coming from somewhere else. David asks the ancient leader how deep the sanctuary really goes. The answer is disturbing. The underground structure was never fully explored. The first discovered the hunger near the upper levels and built the seal around it, but they abandoned the deeper tunnels because every expedition ended the same way. Their people went inside and never came back. For thousands of years, nobody had a reason to investigate again. Now Selene realizes that the missing creature may have been pulled into those same tunnels. The shaking suddenly stops. Silence returns. Then they hear a sound. It is not a roar. It is not a scream. It sounds almost like footsteps. One step, then another. Something is walking toward them. The new creatures begin reacting before anyone else. Several of them turn toward a dark passage and become visibly nervous. Selene notices that they are not responding to the hunger. Their instincts are reacting to something they recognize. That makes no sense. The first generation was supposed to be the oldest supernatural bloodline still alive. The hunger was supposed to be the oldest threat. So what could possibly be beneath them that these creatures recognize? Selene asks the surviving scientist to check the ancient records again. The scientist searches through the damaged files and discovers a reference to something called the Second Origin. The phrase appears only once, buried inside a document describing the earliest experiments. The scientist reads the information carefully and realizes the researchers never believed the first were the final stage of evolution. They believed the first themselves had evolved from something older, something that lived underground. The discovery changes the meaning of everything. The first were not necessarily the beginning of the supernatural bloodlines. They may have simply been the first species capable of surviving outside their original environment. Selene asks what could have existed before them. The scientist has no answer. Then the ancient leader finally speaks. He says there are stories, not records. Not history. Stories passed between the oldest members of the first. According to those stories, before vampires, before Lycans, and even before the first, there were beings that lived beneath the earth. They were not predators in the traditional sense. They existed in complete darkness and survived by consuming energy from living organisms. The first called them the Deepburn. Most believed they were myths, but the shaking suggests otherwise. Selene realizes the possibility that the sanctuary was never simply a prison. It may have been a barrier between two worlds. The hunger was only one creature that crossed that barrier. Perhaps there are others. The footsteps become louder. David tells everyone to retreat. Selene refuses. If something is coming toward them, she wants to know what it is before it reaches the surface. She walks into the passage. David follows. The others stay behind. The tunnel is narrow at first, but it gradually becomes wider. The stone walls are covered with strange markings. Unlike the symbols associated with vampires or Lycans, these marks look organic, almost as if they were carved by something with claws. The deeper they go, the colder the air becomes. Selene suddenly notices something on the ground. Blood. But it is not red. It is dark and almost black. David examines it carefully. He says it does not belong to a vampire or Lycan. Selene touches the edge of the stain. A brief sensation passes through her mind. She sees darkness. She sees the creature created from her blood. It is running. Something is chasing it. Then the vision disappears. Selene realizes the creature is alive, but it is in danger. They continue moving. Eventually, the passage opens into a huge underground cavern. The ceiling is so high that they cannot see it. There are structures everywhere, not buildings, not ruins, something more primitive. Massive stone formations surround a central area where a faint blue light is glowing. David looks around and realizes they are not the first people to enter this place. There are remains everywhere. Old weapons, broken armor, vampire symbols, Lycan markings, and even human equipment. Different generations have come here, and none of them returned. Selene understands that the ancient beings were telling the truth. This place has been hidden for thousands of years. Then she sees movement near the light. The creature is there. It is injured, but alive. Selene immediately runs toward it, but it stops her. Something has changed. Its eyes are different. Its body has partially transformed. The energy from the ancient chamber has altered it again. Selene asks what happened. The creature tells her that when the seal closed, it was pulled through a biological connection beneath the sanctuary. It did not understand where it was going, but it followed a signal coming from the Deepburn. Selene asks what they want. The creature says they are not attacking. They are communicating. Before Selene can respond, the blue light becomes brighter. A figure slowly emerges. It looks almost human, but there is something unnatural about its appearance. Its skin is pale, its eyes are completely dark, and its movements are incredibly slow. It does not attack. It simply watches Selene. Then it speaks. Its voice is unlike anything she has heard. It tells her that the surface world has changed. The Deepburn have been sleeping for thousands of years, but the recent experiments disturb the balance between the surface and underground worlds. The creation of new supernatural bloodlines created a biological signal strong enough to reach them. The Deepburn are now awake. Selene asks what they want. The answer is unexpected. They do not want war. They want their world back. The Deepburn explain that the surface species have been expanding for centuries. Vampires created territories. Lycans spread across forests and mountains. Humans built cities. The supernatural species fought among themselves without realizing that they were slowly destroying the boundary separating the surface from the world below. The Deepburn leader tells Selene that the sanctuary was never meant to keep the Deepburn out. It was meant to keep the surface world out. Selene realizes that the first misunderstood the ancient purpose of the barrier. They thought they were protecting themselves from something dangerous. But perhaps the Deepburn were simply protecting themselves from the surface. That changes the situation completely. Selene lowers her weapon. She asks whether the Deepburn intend to attack humanity. The leader says they have no reason to attack humans. But if humans continue digging deeper, experimenting with supernatural blood, and disturbing the ancient structures, the Deepburn will defend their world. Selene understands the warning. Modern civilization is expanding everywhere. Eventually, humans will discover these tunnels. The question is not whether the Deepburn will reach the surface. It is whether the surface will invade them first. David asks why they brought the creature here. The Deepburn leader looks at it. Because it carries something they have not seen for thousands of years. A bloodline capable of existing between worlds. The creature was not simply created from Selene's blood. It has developed into something capable of connecting different biological systems. The Deepburn believe it could become a bridge, not between vampires and Lycans, between the surface and the underground. Selene realizes that this may be why the creature survived the destruction of the laboratory and the collapse of the ancient chamber. It was never meant to be a weapon. It may have been the first being capable of connecting species that were never supposed to meet. But Selene does not trust the situation completely. She asks the Deepburn leader what happens if the bridge fails. The leader's expression changes. He tells her that if the connection fails, the ancient barrier could collapse. And if that happens, the Deepburn will not remain underground. They will have nowhere else to go. The surface world would become their only option. Selene looks at David. Then she looks at the creature. She understands that the next conflict will not be about vampires and Lycans. It will not even be about humans and supernatural creatures. It will be about two worlds that have been separated for thousands of years. And both sides now know the other exists. Suddenly, the cavern shakes again. But this time the movement is coming from above. The Deepburn leader looks toward the ceiling. He says the humans have arrived. Selene asks how many. The leader gives her an answer that immediately changes her expression. Thousands. A human military force has discovered the sanctuary. They have detected the underground energy and believe it is connected to the supernatural experiments. Their objective is simple: enter the sanctuary, capture whatever is inside, and take it back to the surface. Selene realizes the worst possible situation has just happened. The vampires are here. The Lycans are here. The Deepburn are awake. The new species is caught between them. And now humans are entering the underground world with weapons powerful enough to destroy everything. Selene raises her weapon, but this time, she is not preparing to fight the Deepburn. She is preparing to stop another war before it begins. Because, if the humans attack first, the Deepburn will defend themselves. And when they do, the entire surface world may finally discover what has been waiting beneath it all along. The first sound Selene hears is not gunfire. It is the deep mechanical vibration of machinery moving through the rock above them. The humans have reached the outer tunnels, and whatever equipment they are using is powerful enough to disturb the entire sanctuary. Dust falls from the ceiling, ancient stones crack, and the Deepburn slowly turn toward the sound. For thousands of years, they have remained hidden, but now an army is approaching their home. Selene immediately understands what is about to happen. If the Deepburn believe the humans are attacking, they will respond with everything they have. The military force does not know what is waiting below, and that ignorance could turn a simple operation into a massacre. She tells David to keep the vampires and Lycans back while she moves toward the entrance with the creature. The Deepburn leader warns her that humans cannot be allowed to reach the central chamber. Selene asks whether they can stop them without killing anyone. The leader says they will try, but if the humans attack, the Deep Burn will defend their territory. Selene does not like the answer, but she understands it. For centuries, every conflict in the underworld has started because one side entered another side's territory believing they had the right to take control. She refuses to let the same mistake happen again. They move through the tunnels and reach the upper section of the sanctuary. The atmosphere has completely changed. The ancient silence is gone. Bright lights cut through the darkness as human soldiers move carefully through the passages. They are wearing advanced tactical equipment and carrying weapons designed specifically for biological threats. Selene notices something immediately. They are not ordinary soldiers. Their equipment contains information about vampires and lycans. The military already knows what they are dealing with. That means someone from the previous research program must have survived. David suspects the same thing. The group discovers a human command station hidden inside one of the tunnels. Several scientists are monitoring biological readings from the sanctuary. They are tracking the supernatural creatures in real time. Selene watches from the darkness. She recognizes one of the scientists. It is the same woman who helped them escape the destroyed laboratory. But she is not alone. A second scientist stands beside her. He is the real person in charge of the human operation. He tells the soldiers that the objective is not to destroy the sanctuary. They want to capture a living specimen. Specifically, the creature connected to Selene. Selene realizes they have followed them. The scientist knows that the creature is different from the other experiments. He believes its biology could allow humanity to create a new generation of enhanced humans. He does not see it as a person. He sees it as the next step. Selene becomes furious. She has heard those words before. Every generation of powerful people believes they are the ones who can control evolution. Every generation eventually creates something they cannot control. She decides to confront them. Selene walks into the light. The soldiers immediately raise their weapons. She tells them to lower them. They refuse. The scientist orders them not to shoot because he wants her alive. That mistake gives Selene the advantage. She moves before the soldiers can react. The corridor erupts into chaos. Vampires attack from the darkness. Lycans rush from another tunnel. The humans respond with advanced weapons that temporarily weaken the supernatural creatures. For a few moments, the battle is evenly matched. Then the Deep Burn arrive. The humans have no idea what they are looking at. The first Deep Burn moves through the corridor almost silently. A soldier fires. The creature disappears into the darkness. Another soldier turns. Too late. The Deep Burn move with an unnatural speed, but unlike vampires, they do not fight like predators. They move like something adapted to darkness itself. The human formation collapses. Selene realizes that if she does not stop the battle, everyone will die. She orders the vampires and Lycans to fall back. The human commander refuses to stop. He activates a new weapon. It releases a powerful energy pulse that causes several Deep Burn to collapse. The ancient creatures react immediately. The entire sanctuary begins shaking. The Deep Burn leader realizes that the humans have activated something they do not understand. The energy pulse is interacting with the ancient barrier. If the weapon is used again, the barrier could break. Selene reaches the command station and destroys the device. The commander attacks her personally. Unlike the other soldiers, he has been enhanced with experimental blood. Selene realizes that the humans have already started testing the technology on themselves. The commander is stronger than a normal human. He moves quickly and can survive injuries that should kill him. But he is unstable. His body is constantly changing. Selene fights him through the command station. He tells her that humanity cannot remain weak forever. He believes the supernatural creatures have controlled the world from the shadows for too long. He wants humans to become strong enough to stand against them. Selene tells him that becoming a monster is not the same as becoming strong. He does not listen. The fight becomes brutal. Selene eventually gains the advantage, but she refuses to kill him. Instead, she exposes his unstable condition to his own soldiers. The soldiers begin realizing that their commander has been using experimental blood on himself. Some lower their weapons. Others remain loyal. The surviving scientist finally steps forward. She tells the soldiers the truth. The experiments are not safe. The blood cannot be controlled. The creature created from Selene's blood was the only stable result. The commander argues that stability can be achieved with more research. Selene tells him that this is exactly how the cycle started. More research. More experiments. More bodies. More excuses. The commander refuses to surrender. He activates the remaining systems in the sanctuary. The ancient structure begins reacting. The Deepburn leader realizes that the human technology is unintentionally reopening the sealed pathways. Something below them begins moving. The same presence Selene felt earlier returns. But this time, it is not the hunger, something else is coming. The creature created from Selene's blood suddenly freezes. It says it can hear a voice. The voice is calling from below. The Deepburn leader looks at it with concern. He says the creature is being recognized by the ancient system. The creature asks what that means. The leader says the sanctuary is responding to its blood. Selene asks whether it is connected to the Deepburn. The answer is more complicated. The creature is connected to everything. It carries traces of Selene, traces of the Lycan bloodline, human biology, the ancient first. And now something from the Deepburn. The creature realizes that it is changing again. Selene tells it to resist, but the creature says it does not feel like an attack. It feels like a memory. Suddenly, the ancient walls begin displaying images. Not paintings. Not technology. Something biological. The images show the earliest creatures walking through the underground world. They are not vampires. They are not Lycans. They are not even human. They are the ancestors of everything Selene knows. The ancient beings watch in silence. Even they have never seen these images. The Deepburn leader realizes the truth. The sanctuary is not simply a prison. It is an archive. It contains the biological history of the species that existed before them. And the creature has activated it. The archive reveals that the Deepburn and the first were once connected. They were not separate species. They evolved from the same origin. The first moved toward the surface. The Deepburn remained underground. Over thousands of years, their bloodlines changed. The vampires and Lycans became distant branches. Selene realizes that all of them share a common origin. The war between vampires and Lycans was never a war between completely different species. They were branches of the same ancient family. The revelation changes the atmosphere completely. The vampires look at the Lycans differently. The Lycans look back 4 generations. They were taught to see each other as enemies. Now they discover that their differences are much smaller than they believed. The human commander interrupts the moment. He refuses to accept the revelation. He believes it proves his point. If all supernatural species share a common origin, then humanity should acquire that origin too. He attempts to activate the biological archive. The creature stops him. For the first time, it uses its full ability. The commander is frozen in place as the creature connects to the ancient system. But instead of controlling him, the creature shows him something, his own future, a future where humans successfully reproduce supernatural blood. Millions of enhanced humans are created. The old governments collapse. The creatures begin fighting each other. The planet becomes a battlefield. Humanity survives. But the world becomes unrecognizable. The commander finally understands. The problem was never that humans were weak. The problem was believing that power alone could solve fear. He shuts down the system. The sanctuary becomes quiet. The human soldiers lower their weapons. The Deepburn remains still. The vampires and Lycans stand together. For the first time, everyone understands that continuing the old cycle will destroy them. But Selene knows they still have one problem. The ancient archive has been activated. And now the entire biological history of the supernatural world has been exposed. Someone outside the sanctuary may have detected the signal. David checks the recovered equipment. His expression changes. He tells Selene that they are receiving a transmission from somewhere far away. It is not human. It is not vampire. It is not Lycan. It is not Lycan.